So Caroline Glick, who works for the Prime Minister of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu, is giving a speech at a Jewish organization called JNS. I believe it's called Jewish News. I forget what it stands for even. So pardon me for that. Maybe Jewish News Syndicate. That's possible. Anyhow, make sure to subscribe, like, and leave your comments. The video is going to be in regards to the idea that the world thinks that Israel's losing, but she is going to talk about how we are very much, in fact, winning. And I'm not sure how people don't see that, but it's very clear. Make sure to follow me at Rafi the Realtor for all of your real estate needs in Miami and the greater South Florida area. And you can support my channel and the work that I do by going to the Buy Me a Coffee link, which can be found in the pinned comment or description. Let's check it out.
And I want to talk to you about information warfare because I think it's one of the things that we don't talk about a lot, and it obviously preoccupies a lot of us, not just because we're in the information business or deal with information, but because it is what the Prime Minister calls the eighth front, that we've been fighting a seven-front war, but the eighth front is the front of incitement, of hatred, of Jew hatred that has been galloping forward throughout the world, particularly since October 7th, in a way that we really hadn't expected. And the nature and velocity of the spread is something that I don't think we've ever seen before. And so I wanted to begin my remarks by commenting. I saw on my feed this morning just a snippet of an interview that Jeremy Boring, who works for the Daily Wire. He's the CEO of the Daily Wire, and he also, I think, has a podcast. He was interviewed by another podcaster, and he said there that, in the clip that I saw, that every time that he writes something pro-Israel, that he's immediately swamped, he's not Jewish, by dozens of talkbacks accusing him of, I don't know what, the blood libel, of whatever anti-Semitic diatribe is du jour on that particular day. So that every single time that he says something in support of Israel, he gets smacked. He gets smacked by dozens and dozens, if not hundreds and hundreds of comments by users who attack him as a Jew, and he's not Jewish. And we also see something else, which is that TikTok, as soon as TikTok entered the American market, we saw a direct correlation between TikTok's rise or penetration of the American media market and the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States. That is, the platform itself was a direct disseminator and spreader of anti-Semitism throughout the U.S. bloodstream. And so the more people were on TikTok, the more people were anti-Semitic, almost in a one-to-one ratio. And this brings us to sort of an irony, right? I mean, many of us in this room are old enough to remember a world before internet and the wonder that we felt when we saw how you could just sit at your computer and talk to people all over the world, and you didn't need a fax machine and you didn't need a stamp, right? I mean, it was something that we had never imagined, this dial-up connection to an internet, and suddenly you're attached to the entire world. And by the early 20th century, it was already changing the outcomes of elections. It was already impacting whoever understood how to use the internet better, was able to get his message out better, and that was already impacting politics in a way that nobody had anticipated. But what we find is that the proliferation of information throughout the world is not correlated to an expansion of knowledge. It's not that the more information or stuff that people see on a daily basis makes them more knowledgeable. In fact, it makes them less knowledgeable. So that people, on average, today throughout the world are less knowledgeable about facts than they were before probably there was an internet, which is really weird, except then you ask yourself a question, why is that? Because at the same time that information is spreading, disinformation is also being spread deliberately and with malice aforethought. And so what is it about disinformation that makes it more amenable to adoption by users of platforms like TikTok, like Twitter, or X, or Facebook, or what have you, Instagram? It's that it doesn't require of you to think about how to solve problems. It requires you to think about who to blame for your problems. And that's much easier. It's a much easier sell. What disinformation does is it plays on latent prejudices. It's directed towards, it's tailor-made to be aligned with people's prejudices that existed before they got the disinformation, and then it turns it on, it triggers, it empowers the people who have a latent prejudice to suddenly feel comfortable expressing that prejudice. All right, so that what's notable is that the levels of anti-Semitism have risen less on average in places like Arab countries than it has in places like Europe or North America. And why is that? Because the prejudices were not latent to begin with, right? If you look at Qatar or you look at Egypt or you look at Saudi Arabia or wherever you happen to look, the data of Pew surveys on anti-Semitism among Jordanians in the 1990s showed that nearly 100% of Jordanians had negative attitude towards Jews, and lo and behold, they still do, right? What you find, the big differences between states like France or Canada or the United States of America, where you had more latent prejudices that didn't express themselves in opinion survey data in the 1990s and the 2000s and even in the 2010s. But it is now triggered by the likes of deliberate dissemination of prejudice against Jews on these platforms by state actors, including, of course, Qatar, Turkey, China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, etc. And these are deliberate operations by governments, and it's also by individuals. Now, if you go back for a second to the Boring statement from this morning, not boring as in boring, but Jeremy Boring, I think it's Boering, I'm not sure. But what is attacking him? What are those dozens and dozens of comments on every pro-Israel statement that Jeremy makes? Well, many of them are likely not people, but bots. So that there are automated responses that are triggered by an algorithm that is aligned to pro-Israel messaging. So it's triggered by a pro-Israel statement, pro-Israel phrase, whatever it happens to be. And so it goes to him automatically, right? And it drives traffic away from him. Maybe he'll lose subscribers. And on the other hand, you find over time, and what we've seen is that these influencers, these podcasters, broadcasters, authors, whatever it happens to be, they may have spent most of their time talking about widgets. But if they talked about widgets and then suddenly threw in something about how Jews control Hollywood, then suddenly that statement got 300,000 more views than anything that they had said about their normal subject matter of widgets. So that you have somebody who talked about something having nothing to do with Jews, like, for instance, male fitness. We've seen a lot of that in the so-called manosphere. And then suddenly when they start introducing anti-Semitism to their statements, they become world famous. And they become massively respected as experts on the issue of Jews controlling everything nefarious on planet Earth. And so if you're looking to get the maximum number of subscribers to your podcast or to whatever it is that you're selling, then the way to do it, you find, is by trucking in anti-Semitism, is by disseminating anti-Semitic messaging and being giving approval to others to feel comfortable in their own anti-Semitism or to adopt anti-Semitism as a calling card, even if they hadn't really thought too much about Jews in the past and certainly hadn't really thought about hating us. And obviously, you see that very clearly in the woke right, that they're responding not only, it's not that, somebody who suddenly discovered that Israel is the root of all evil when she was praising Israel after October 7th. It's not that she suddenly found some deeper truth. Rather, she found the deeper truth of marketing. So that it's a deeper truth of a bottom line financially, which then, brings us to the question of, well, what do we do? And so democracies, places that have freedom of speech first I just want to mention one other thing, which is that the general institutions that we've relied upon to be telling the truth, or at least being capable of disseminating information that was real, are the media and academia, right? I mean, these are two sort of classic institutions that if you had the good housekeeping, stamp of Harvard University or of the New York Times, then that was true. I read it in the Times, right? How many times have we said that? We're quoting an article. It was an article I read in the New York Times some weeks ago, right? And then everybody believes you, right? That's how it was all of the years previous. And now we have a situation where the New York Times gets a Pulitzer Prize for a front page photo showing a child who suffers from cystic fibrosis, and it's used as a blood libel to say that Israel is starving children in Gaza, right? They edited out of that photo the little boy's brother, who is a normal, healthy, well-fed toddler, right? They didn't want that in there, so they took it out, and so you have the New York Times disseminating blood libel on purpose, deliberately, with a malice of forethought. And then you have things like settler colonial studies, right, in top-ranked universities when there's no such thing. So it's all completely imaginary, made-up stuff. And people write books about settler colonialism. I don't know. I live in a frat. I've never seen a colonialist in my neighborhood, you know, and it's all just suburban housewives, you know. I mean, and by the way, that's where King David was born. So it's a phenomenon that we're facing today that is new, that's different from what we've seen in the past, where the institutions that in the past could be relied on to authenticate truth are now paid. How much money was Qatar exposed as funding U.S. academic institutions? And, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars, right? In the past, I don't know, 15 years or something like that. So they've realized not only can you manipulate narrative, online narratives, China as well, right? Not only can you do that, but if you pay an institution, you take over an institution through donations, then you can introduce entire spheres of so-called academia that are all false, that are all lies, that are all completely untrue. So the authenticators, the academia, the traditional media are sort of, you know, part of this complex of untruth, of tailoring messages to latent prejudices. So now, having told much of the miserable truth about the situation, the question is, what are Israelis, what are Jews all around the world to do, given this extraordinary system that's arrayed against us and being used against us? And I think that there are two answers, and neither of them are perfect, but they're both enough. The first thing that we have to remember is that we have one commodity that's on our side, and it's little, but it's important. It's called truth. And yeah, let's go for it. Truth. Let's put our hands together for truth, right? Big applause. That's right. We have truth on our side. And so when we're telling, it's not a narrative. It's not the Israeli narrative that we're telling. These are actually the facts. You know, many of the so-called journalists, right, that were killed by IDF forces are actually terrorists, just like we said they were when we killed them, you know? And the Hamas does not give actual data on the number of civilians killed. They lie, right? As Colonel John Spencer, the head of the Urban Warfare Institute in West Point, has shown, we have the lowest combatant to non-combatant death ratio in the history of modern warfare.
Yeah, that was a that was a terrible applause, but nonetheless deserved a lot more. There's a 1-to-1, maybe a 1-to-2 ratio, deaths to civilians to combatants. And the Gaza Health Ministry, aka Hamas, does not distinguish between fighters, civilians. They also don't distinguish between who's died of natural causes. And so you're looking at a 1-to-1 versus, or maybe 1-to-2, and the average for modern warfare is 1-to-8 or 1-to-9 civilians to combatants. And yet everyone's up in arms with Israel. It's mind-blowing.
Right? And this isn't special pleading. This is the Jewish way of war. This is the IDF's way of war, because we don't target civilians. And obviously this whole genocide thing is a blood libel, right? So when we say the truth, we're saying the truth. When we tell our side of the story, what we're telling is a story. And you know what? There are lots of people like Jeremy Boring who's going to be willing, unbelievably, and thank him, right, to suffer the hatred as if he were a Jew, because he actually cares about the truth. And I think that there are enough people in this world who care about the truth to get us over the hump. Are we going to have a majority on our side? We'll have enough. We'll have enough. And we don't have to be looking for the majority. We have to be looking for people who are good. And we'll win out. Truth will win out, and good wins out over evil. Why? Because among other things, because God, okay? It's okay. It's okay. And the second thing that we have to bear in mind is that, as the Prime Minister always says, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, right? The eternal nature of Israel is true. And our job in our generation, just like all previous generations and our children's and grandchildren's generations after us, is to steer this forward and maintain our faith with that basic truth. We have to protect our lives, our country, our people, and move forward on this road to Jewish eternity. That's our job, and we're doing a really good job. And we shouldn't, if we think of this as a caravan and all of the untruths being spoken about us as the dogs barking at us, we have to remain true to ourselves and to our mission and to the truth, and just keep going forward and not be distracted and not be convinced, obviously, by the barking dogs on the side, because we are our story, and we write our story, and we move forward with our story. And we have so much to be proud of in what this generation of Jews here in Israel has been doing for the past 3 years.
It's incredible what the young generation has done. The young generation has pushed through despite 3 years of war. It's very, very hard on the economy. It's hard on the civilians. People have businesses, they have families, they have to go to school, they're trying to move forward and excel in life. And despite all of the challenges, the Israeli nation, the Jews and non-Jews of Israel have come together and pushed through this despite all of the challenges. The multi-front war, the slander against us, everybody's jumping down our throats, everyone is looking at us under a microscope. And what we need to do is keep pushing forward. Even when the walls of the cave are falling on top of us, we have to keep moving forward. If you crawl, swim, climb, whatever you need to do to get through that tiny, narrow cave, there's beautiful light at the end of it. And this is, I think, the lesson that we have to learn right now. I believe it is a spiritual lesson. It is something that God's trying to tell us, where we have to believe in Him. We have to have faith in Him and not and rely on others to write the story for us.
Right? We have had so many accomplishments on the battlefield in our society, amongst our people. It's not only is it enough, it's more than enough. It's more than enough. It's something that should make you, it makes me, anytime I think about it, choke up, because it's so extraordinary. The kids on the front lines now since October 7th are the most amazing people that we never imagined existed. And I would be remiss if I didn't finish this by also thanking my boss, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And on a personal level, I can thank him for giving me the privilege of working with him and learning from him up close. But I think just as a Jew, I mean, most amazing thing is that I'm sitting next to a guy who's literally immortal, because the extraordinary things that he's doing in leading this country today are going to be spoken of. We'll all be forgotten. Or I'll be forgotten. But he's going to be spoken of the way that we speak of King David and Joshua. People are always going to remember him because of what he's doing today. And we have to recognize how blessed we are to have him. And so I want to thank you. I want to again reinforce the message. Yep, nobody promised us a rose garden, right? And anyway, they're full of thorns. And when you look at our people, you realize they are roses amongst the thorns, just like it says in the Song of Songs. And we're lucky and we're blessed. And we shouldn't feel tired and sad because it's hard. We should realize how lucky and blessed we are to be living at this time when we move forward to a new era of Jewish history, thanks to our extraordinary children and ourselves and our leader. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's amazing, amazing. First of all, Caroline Glick, you're a gem. My grandmother, who passed of blessed memory, was a huge, huge fan of yours, and I would love to have you on my podcast at some point. It takes an incredible amount of grit and toughness to do what Bibi Netanyahu does. He has so much pressure to deal with. I can't think of anyone in the world that has to deal with the kind of pressure he has to deal with, more than Trump, because Trump is loved by a lot more people. Bibi has unbelievable pressure, and despite the pressure, he pushes forward, and he's not void of mistakes. He's made mistakes. He's not a perfect person by any means, but he has, I mean, he is the reason why we've continued to defeat our enemies up until now, since October 7th. And the key here is that he doesn't falter. He doesn't quit. You know, he's got to keep going. So, and all of us have to keep going. With that said, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave your comments, follow me at Rafi the Realtor for all of your South Florida real estate needs. And you can support the channel by clicking on the Buy Me a Coffee link in the pinned comment or description. I look forward to you hopefully tuning into the next video. Until next time, peace.